This is the lecture on the tobacco industry, part 3. So let's continue on here. Law firms that represented tobacco company clients also funded research on tobacco. So it wasn't just the tobacco companies, but also the law firms, which is kind of a strange thing for law firms to be doing to conduct research, but indeed they did, especially on tobacco. What do the law firms know about tobacco? The projects that the lawyers selected for funding often involved research on the potential confounding factors for the adverse health effects associated with tobacco. So what do we mean by confounding factors? So, so if you could do research and show that, well, it's not really the nicotine that's making people addicted, but that it's certain, personality flaws of the smoker, that the smoker is a impulsive person with low self-control, a tendency to get addicted to anything, get addicted to various types of food or caffeine or drugs, etc. And so it's not really the tobacco that's the issue, it's the person, right? We saw that with automobiles, that you could say, well, it's not that the automobiles are unsafe, it's that the drivers are reckless or irresponsible, and so it's their fault. So if you can come up with research to back that up, then it strengthens your arguments in court. For example, projects examine genetic factors associated with lung disease or the influence of stress and low-protein diets on health. Thus, the research served the purpose of deflecting attention away from tobacco as a health hazard. So don't look at how tobacco could be unhealthy. Look at how other things about the smoker might be more important, might be essential. That these smokers are not very healthy people. They might have some bad genes, making them vulnerable to diseases. They might have, stress, psychological issues that make them smoke, but it's not really the nicotine that's doing it. The tobacco industry also formed funding organizations to give the appearance that the research they supported was independent of the influence of the industry. So again, it's kind of the same thing that you saw, that we talked about before, is that you fund organizations. So it might be an independent research organization, an organization that only does research. And so the company gives them money to conduct research, but there's kind of strings attached to it, right? It's kind of a wink, wink. Yeah, we want you to do independent research, but since we're paying you, we actually want you to do research that's favorable to us. And if you come back with research that's not favorable to us, then maybe we're not going to do business with you anymore. We'll find some other research company that will come back with findings that are more favorable to us. See the contamination process here of the research by the dollars involved, who's paying for the research, right? So there's sort of, again, undermining of how research is really supposed to work. You're supposed to be finding truth, not finding what you want to find. The industry stated publicly that the Council for Tobacco Research, CTR, was formed in 1954 to fund independent scientific research to determine whether there was a link between smoking and lung cancer. However, so they say one thing publicly, hey, this CTR, this is an independent research firm. But their own documents, internal documents from Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company, have shown that CTR was actually formed for public relations purposes. So it was formed not to do honest, independent research, but it was formed as a way to come up with public relations information. Propaganda, should we call it that? Propaganda information to persuade, to sway the public, not based on truth, but based on this propaganda being cranked out by these quote-unquote research firms to convince the public that the hazards of smoking had not been proven. Okay, so if you can give your information a scientific basis, a research founding, well, it makes it seem authoritative, right? Well, if scientists tell us that the hazards of smoking are not proven, well, they must not be. Maybe that cigarettes aren't that bad because these scientists say that they're not that bad, and scientists know what they're talking about, right? So if it's just Joe Schmo who's saying that the cigarettes don't hurt you, well, who's going to trust just somebody who somebody's not an authority? But scientists, people will listen to them because of their authority. So it was a tactic that these companies used. The goal of much of corporate research on nicotine was to modify tobacco product design. The tobacco company anticipated that its profits could be protected if it could modify cigarettes to make the benefit, believed to be stress relief, outweigh the harms. So the industry sought to identify the harmful components of tobacco smoke and to eliminate them with filters. I don't put that there, but the industry more and more said, well, nicotine's not harmful to you. It's the tars, the toxins, the smoke that that you're inhaling. That's what's doing the damage. And so we can fix that with filters, with a safer cigarette that filters out the toxins and only lets stuff that's benign, that's not a problem, into your system. So the tobacco industry research aimed at producing a safer, quote unquote, safer cigarette, processed through several phases. During the 50s, the industry developed cigarettes with filters. So prior to the 50s, they didn't have filters on cigarettes. They were unfiltered. It's the old-fashioned way, right? During the 60s, cigarettes were lower in tar, so they reduced the tar, a particular type of toxin in the smoke, in the tobacco. The particulate matter believed to be associated with cancer. So low tar cigarettes, filtered cigarettes. Next, the tobacco industry's research on filter ventilation showed that although ventilation reduced tar, according to standard smoking machine tests, and made cigarettes taste milder, it actually did not reduce tar delivery to the smoker. So their internal research, even though they're selling these filters as, hey, this is solving our problems here with an unhealthy cigarette, in their internal research was saying, well, it's not really reducing the bad stuff, the tar delivery to the smoker. But again, did they make this known to the public? Did they let the public know that the filters are not really working? No, they don't. It's the filters were considered to be more of a, make you feel good, but not actually work effectively. The tobacco industry's research on filter ventilation showed that although ventilation reduced tar according to, so it looks like, did I copy that? It looks like it's the copy of the same point. I don't know how I copied that, duplicated that. I guess I must have thought it was an extra important point. Anyway, so we can skip that one. Smokers of ventilated cigarettes take more puffs and breathe more deeply, thus defeating the purpose of the tar reduction. See, so it actually, their own research showed that cigarettes with filters, that smokers take more puffs, breathe more deeply, and so it doesn't really work. It's offset. The negative changes are offset any potential reductions in the tar. And that was their own research that found out from these internal documents. We know that they found that these filters didn't work. Thus, by the 1970s, the tobacco industry knew that smokers, quote unquote, compensated for or altered the way that they smoked reduced tar or nicotine cigarettes. And so bottom line, they didn't work, but they sold it as working anyway, again, to make people feel more comfortable buying and smoking those cigarettes and thinking that it wasn't going to be too damaging to their health. Several years later, research on smoker compensation was published in the scientific literature. The tobacco industry realized that its efforts to develop a safer cigarette were a failure, and they shifted to marketing the image of a safer cigarette rather than product design. See, so they went from kind of trying to become more to be safer to just kind of complete marketing BS, propaganda, and you see, of course, through all those decades, that a lot of times they made smoking look cool in their ads, and that healthy, attractive people smoked. And if you wanted to be a healthy, attractive person, then you might want to consider smoking. So, that's just pure manipulation, not based on any reality. The reality is that these, tobacco raises your risk of all different kinds of diseases, which is going to make you unhealthy and going to make you unattractive, and going to potentially could shorten your life and all of that. So they just shifted to pure image, public image, and marketing, and didn't even try to become safer, because when they did try, it failed. So now I leave it right there. I'm already at 10 slides, so I didn't want to get too long. But of course, we know that eventually, despite all their deceptions and their phony research and their manipulation and propaganda and marketing and all of this kind of stuff, kind of misleading marketing, that eventually it caught up with them, and they were successfully sued for damages to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. But even though they took a big, hit with these lawsuits, and that laws have changed and that behavior has changed, that there's significantly fewer smokers in the United States than in previous decades. That's gone down a lot. Still, we have a lot of people who smoke because it is addictive. And it's true that there's been improvements, and there's been greater regulations about being able to advertise and advertise to kids and try to get people hooked on cigarettes. Of course, nowadays, we fast forward to 2020, then we have all these sort of vaping issues and regulations for vaping and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to kind of stick to a big classical historical example, because we can see that clearly, kind of looking back at it now. So yes, they did take a big hit years ago, and the regulations are much stricter now, and there's not as many profits being made as in the past. But don't think that these guys have been put out of business, because they're still selling a lot of cigarettes to a lot of people, and that the business has really expanded in the developing world. In many countries around the world, people are smoking at much higher numbers and higher percentages than here in the United States. And so these companies are making really big international dollars. So the fight continues. And also the deviance and the misleading people and the same kind of stuff are happening in countries around the world. So, of course, tobacco is still a serious problem, still a health hazard and a health problem in many parts around the world, and more so in other places nowadays than in the United States. But again, to wrap this up, what do we see here? It's the same theme that we've stressed for the past few lectures. Profit motivates people, tempts people to engage in deviance and to do things that are harmful to the public, harmful to individuals, but are good for the company, are good for the organization. I've limited these past few lectures to corporate deviance, whether it's selling unhealthy products or creating unhealthy work conditions, or polluting, corporate pollution, that kind of stuff. But indeed, all sorts of organizations, when it comes to money, are tempted to cut corners and may endanger the public health and public safety, because they want to save bucks. And I haven't focused on it, but sometimes government does that too. Sometimes government engages in this kind of elite deviance because government wants to save dollars too. All organizations are concerned about how much they're spending and where their money's going. And if you can cut corners, then that's more money for something else. And so there's always that temptation to shortchange the customer, to shortchange the public, chasing that almighty dollar. So it's a serious problem. And I'll get back to this other theme that I've been stressing these past few chapters, which is, what's the answer? What's the solution? Well, one of them is regulation, that you need strong laws, strong enforcement, and frankly, strong penalties when these powerful companies or powerful organizations deceive, mislead, defraud, cheat, and harm people, whether intentionally or unintentionally. That individuals have to be held responsible, accountable. There has to be punishment. And frankly, if there's any area where deterrence should work, it's in the area of corporate and elite deviance, because elite people at the top of society, tend to be the most calculating and the most quote-unquote rational, where they're counting their dollars and cents to try to figure out whether things are going to pay or not, whether there's a payoff to bad behavior or not. So organizations are very calculating. And if you raise the risk of you getting caught, and you raise the punishment, and make the punishment more severe and more swift and certain, as we learn from deterrence theory, then if there's any area where deterrence theory should work, it should be with elite deviants. These people should respond to threats of punishment, because unlike that, unlike some desperate poor person who may commit a crime without thinking through carefully what they're doing, who may act in an impulsive, impassioned way and may not calculate very carefully and not be deterred by criminal punishment, these elites should be. It should effectively work to punish them because they do think about the pros and cons, the costs and benefits, more so than ordinary citizens, ordinary individuals. And so, again, let me stress that point. We often criticize deterrence theory because it doesn't work as well as we would like with ordinary criminals. But it certainly should, and there's evidence, some evidence, that it does work on elite forms of crime. So I'll leave it there, and we'll continue on next week.